So the other type of nucleophilic aromatic substitution is elimination followed by addition. And I said that this one was less common. And there are also some very specific criteria that we're going to use to characterize when this can versus cannot occur. So sort of the setup here is that we still have an aryl halide. Right, or there's a leaving group on an sp2 carbon. But what we don't have is a pi withdrawing group in either the ortho or para position relative to the leaving group. So a different mechanism must occur. And this elimination-addition mechanism requires very harsh conditions. Like extremely high temperature, 200 or 300 degrees Celsius, and some high pressure.